Welcome back. My name is Katie Chorbak, and I am the president of 5051 Vets. Tonight, we're going to talk about a subject that's not spoken about enough within veteran circles, active duty circles, and the country at large. A lot of people know me as the president of this organization, but a lot of close friends and battle buddies know my true story. I'm an MST survivor. MST is military sexual trauma. It is an epidemic that is hidden within the military, within the rank structure, because of silence, because of complicity, and because sexual assault and sexual harassment is absolutely acceptable behavior within our military today. So tonight, we're going to talk about it openly so that we can have that discussion out loud for everybody across the country to hear, so they can understand what women and men are going through within the military. First, I am going to bring on our first guest, who is Danis. Danis is a personal friend of mine, a mentor among many women veterans across the country, and the godmother of the military sexual trauma movement. She also is the lead administrator of Service Women Who Serve, which is a page dedicated to women in the military. Diana, welcome.
It's very nice to see you, Katie, and I still have my shirt. I'm your sister's keeper. I've got it packed away neatly in a safe place. We got a lot of stuff done on it. On the back of that shirt, there were 10 things that we were trying to get done at the time we did this, with Vanessa Guillen having been murdered on Fort Hood. And we went out all over the country and did this, it was a wonderful effort, and it created a lot of great opportunities, and it created a lot of new laws, most all of which have now been overturned, which is so lovely. I started doing this when I was still on active duty. I'm reticent to say, but I started working with Patricia Schroeder, who was the senior congresswoman from Colorado in the 1st District. And she had gone into Ms. Magazine in its very first issue and said that, if we have such difficulty, they had done a feature on military and women in the military. He said, if we have so much trouble with there being problems with women in the military and perhaps being raped and assaulted, this is in 1976 now, okay? And she said, then perhaps women shouldn't be in the military. I called her office. At that time, it was like $10 a minute from Germany. Called her office and I said, perhaps men shouldn't be in the military if this is your objective. And she called me back and she's like, and I said, I can't afford this call. So here's my number and call me back. And she did. And we spent years, literally almost 20 years, to get women's care into the VA. And so what I'm going to give you is a little bit of history about what was happening in those days. One, and this may be new. You want me to do this yet? Okay.
Not yet. Let me introduce everybody.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm everybody to have a discussion. And just so everybody knows, Diana and Danis, the shirt that we are wearing, there are 2 of us that are going to wear it tonight. In 2020, Vanessa Guillen was murdered, and women veterans were outraged across the country. Enough of us were outraged, we built an entire movement called Our Sisters Keeper Movement, which activated women veterans across the country. And it's how I met a lot of these wonderful people on this panel. And the next person I am going to bring up is one of my very personal friends. I have known her since we built Our Sisters Keeper Movement, and now she is the vice president of 5051 Vets. I want to welcome Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight, Katie. And Diana, it's so great to see you again. And I have my shirt too still, Katie. I had to go dig it up, but I was like, I remember I still have my shirt. Happy, it sounds like the wrong word to say tonight, but I'm glad to be here to have this conversation because it's important. And I remember back in 2020, just dealing with individuals via social media who had no idea what kind of epidemic it was in the military and had no idea what kind of statistics were behind it. So I'm happy to be here tonight on the panel with the rest of these great folks.
We're happy to have you. And people tend to think that sexual assault in the military is a women's issue. And unfortunately, that's not particularly true. Men are readily sexually assaulted in the military as well. It is not spoken about enough. And so we are welcoming tonight one of our close friends, male advocates, and lawyer who is still fighting this fight, Brian Lewis, to the panel. Brian, so good to see you. Brian, can you hear us? He's working through it. Well, he's working through that. Hey, Brian. All right. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself before I move on to the next introduction?
Sure. My name's Brian Lewis. I'm an attorney at law. I been an attorney since 2017. I work primarily in military law and VA claims appeals. I've been privileged to be part of the military sexual trauma movement since about 2010 or so. I see we've got a decent cast tonight, and here's hoping we have a good session. Thank you.
We're so happy to have you, Brian. Like, so happy to have you. Next, I'm going to introduce a very close friend of mine who, if you saw what happened recently, was in DC with me. Her name is Lindsay Knapp. Lindsay Knapp is the executive director of Combat Sexual Assault. She is also an attorney, and she has also been in the fight for an extremely long time on this issue. Welcome, Lindsay.
Hey, thank you, Katie. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm an attorney and Army veteran with Combat Sexual Assault. I founded Combat Sexual Assault in about 2019, 2020 after I was experiencing retaliation for reporting that Delta Force was drug trafficking and human trafficking in a really big way. And that ultimately led to my termination from Special Operations, which later became the subject of a book that Seth Harp wrote, The Fort Bragg Cartel, which now HBO is picking up into a series. So go team. I'm happy to be here. I feel I'm in Lisa's boat. Like, am I happy to be here? I'm like super excited to be to talk about this and bring this conversation out into the open where it belongs.
That's right. This has been a conversation that has stayed hidden within sexual assault circles within veteran spaces, right? And so now we need to open it up to the public like we did in 2020. And so next, I want to bring up Steph. Steph is a good friend of mine. She is a former Brigade sexual assault response coordinator for the Army National Guard, also an advocate. Nope, I fucked up. I fucked something up. She's about to correct me. Go ahead.
It's for the Army Reserve. It's okay.
So the Army Reserve, Steph has been an advocate for a very long time, very close friends with everybody on this panel. Steph, welcome.
That was mostly my introduction too.
I stole your thunder.
But I am here. I'm a big data nerd, so that's also why I'm also here, is because I love the statistics and the reporting. So I'm excited to share that with you guys.
Absolutely. And lastly, on the panel tonight, we have our good friend, Dee. Dee is the president of Repatriate Our Patriots. She is in the fight of immigration, but she is also an advocate for sexual assault in the military and has been for years and has some stories local to her that I'm sure she is going to share about tonight. Dee, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Katie. And it's so glad. I feel like this is a reunion, a wonderful, beautiful reunion from back 2020. And yeah, it feels really good. Weird to say, but it's also very nice to just see where we are today. And yes, I am an Army combat veteran. I am a military spouse, a first generation Mexican American. And I am also, yes, the president for Repatriate Our Patriots, but also the vice chair for the National LULAC Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, which is what brought me to the fight, right, in the I Am Vanessa Guillen movement, which, as you guys can see behind me, Vanessa Guillen is with us tonight, right here. And that's how, it got me into this, and, the whole LULAC movement that brought us all together. And during the COVID movement, right, it put us on Zoom across the country, and I have to say it gave us a voice that it got louder and louder throughout the nation. And who would have thought, right, that Zoom at that point is what made us in a hashtag, a hashtag that just rumbled. So I am so happy and honored to be here with all of you.
Girlfriend, when I asked you for your title to introduce you, that is what I meant. It's like, what the fuck? So I want to go through some history because a lot of people watching, you all know Vanessa Guillen's name, but everybody on this panel knows a lot more names. And one of the names that we all know that nobody talks about is Lavina Johnson.
Yeah.
And that case. And we have Natasha Potion. We said her name in 2020. Elder Fernandez. There is a long list of people whose lives were taken within the military. But the problem is, where did Diana go? I was about to have her talk about the history. Shit. So we all know the history. Steph will get Diana back. But we are going to go through some history here for folks watching, because the sexual assault epidemic within the military is not new. We all know names of scandals on this panel that none of you have ever heard of, such as Tailhook. Everybody watching who's a veteran, especially women veterans and Brian and survivors, know what Tailhook is. We also have been watching the scandal erupt on Fort Hood of the doctor who sexually assaulted multiple women. And so I want to go through the history with everybody on here because everybody knows a little bit of history. And so I want to first talk about Lavina Johnson in that case. For those watching, Lavina Johnson was brutally murdered. Hear me very loudly and clearly. Brutally murdered. And her family was told that she committed suicide. And the facts of the case are abhorrent. I'm not going to do it on live because I'm sure we would probably not be able to do it on live. I encourage anybody to Google the Lavina Johnson case. Her father has been fighting since her murder for the truth to come out and for the family to hear it, like to be understood. And so let's talk about Lavina Johnson first. What do y'all got? It was definitely murder.
Yeah, it was her murder was a wild time. I remember I was serving then, and it was, that was like right kind of in the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, when everything was just really churning, and deployments were crazy and all the things. And the idea that women, particularly women of color, were like cannon fodder was like very, very evident. And I think like all of us, when we heard what happened to her, we immediately were like, that could have been us. And like, we know in hindsight right now, like the people that we believe killed her were likely, they may have been service members, but they also might have been like Blackwater contractors and all those kinds of stuff. And as we've learned, since that, all the contractors that have been arrested and all these other things, how they were kind of like just basically mercenaries, then it kind of like shines some more light on what could have happened, or adds more to the story, not just to what we think might have happened. But obviously, I know we're not going to get into the details of how she died, but the how she died is, no one would do that to themselves, right? Like that's why we're all like, no, that there's no way that happened. There's no way someone would do that, like full stop. But I'll pause and let my wonderful colleagues chime in too.
Diana, just because you popped in, we were waiting for you to come back to talk through the history, but what we started talking about was the Lavina Johnson case. And I was saying that we know a lot of names and a lot of history, and one of the cases that our viewers really need to dive into is the Lavina Johnson case to understand the corruption the military goes through to hide sexual assault.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not an attorney, and so I'm not worried about getting nailed in court on this, but I think that general killed her. And that has been what has come back over and over and over again. And you don't do that to yourself. You don't pour acid on your genitals. You don't shoot yourself with a long rifle. There's a million things that happened in that were absolutely horrible. And I feel terrible for the Johnson family, and have continued to feel that way for many years, because this is still undone. It has not been resolved in any way, shape, or form, and she deserves justice. She and many others deserve justice. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
If I may jump in here, right? It's her case. It just really highlights, right, what we see so often, which is the lack of transparency within the military, right? Her family continues to call for an independent investigation, right? This is what we called on for Vanessa Guillen's case, right? An independent investigation. And we got it, right? We got it. Why has Lavina Johnson's family has not been able to get an independent investigation, right? And this is exactly what we're asking for here locally in Norfolk for the murder of Angelina Resendiz, right? And this is what we continue to ask. Yes, there's an investigation. Yes, there's a court case going on right now for her murder. But what we want is an independent investigation as to the procedural reasons of what happened, what could have prevented that murder in the first place, right? The Navy has not yet responded. But again, it goes back to the transparency part, which is what happened here with Lavina's case, right? And like Diana said, it's like, okay, something higher ranking and all of that must have done it, must have happened, right? Which is what keeps punting the ball down the hill.
100%. And there's always been a lack of transparency, right? And so, Diana, I want you to run us through. I kind of talked about tailhook and some, like, there is history here. As the godmother of the movement, can you school us all on the history that you have seen since you have been fighting for this for decades?
Yeah, for one thing, I think that a lot of people are not aware that in the 1960s and 70s, when we had women who were raped, when we had women who were assaulted, when we had miscarriages, we went to the freaking military hospital and got a DNC. They just did it. And I don't think people understand that we had more rights before they started highlighting all of this in terms of reproductive care than we have today in the 60s and 70s, because no one was supposed to have sex. Everybody was supposed to be a good girl, and we were less than 1% of the military. So they didn't want any of that crap out there. So they just did it. And they did this in World War II. They did it in Korea. They did it in Vietnam. They did it until we started saying, you need to provide us with this care. And then they're like, okay, that's over. So we fought and we fought and we went to D.C. and we got them in 2022 pass, the most minimal possible legislation they could to help women on these issues. And what they did was say, okay, life of the mother, rape, incest, that's it. And then they didn't implement it in most VAs in the country. So that was supposed to help active duty military too, because it was supposed to help active duty military families. So men and women. And we just, we hit a wall with it. We were very proud of ourselves working with the National Women's Law Center and got a lot done. And then it all washed backwards. Historically, I will tell you that when we took a bunch of stuff to Congress in the 80s. And I'd been fighting, Pat Schroeder and I were just constantly railing on people on the Hill because back many years, more actually got done when they wanted women on a pedestal. They either want us on a pedestal or in the gutter. They haven't quite figured out where, but it seems to be somewhere between heaven and hell. And so we tend to stay in those positions. The other part is that the harassment of women in the military was really bad, but the hazing of men in the military was god-awful. And so what was happening to men in the 60s and 70s was a tremendous amount of hazing. That included utilization of everything from plungers to soda bottles to all kinds of things that damaged internal organs, and the men would not come forward. We could not get men to come forward in the 80s. In the 90s, they're like, we're not doing this. And I understand it wasn't fun for anybody. I assure you, we were all getting death threats. It was horrible. But at that time, the motivation for women to really move on these issues around sexual trauma is there was no MST. That didn't exist. There was harassment, hazing, rape, and assault. There wasn't anything else. They didn't have a name. So the VA gave a contract to a university in Minnesota, and they had to do this big thing on how many men and women in the military had been assaulted. And this was driven by Senator Akaka. And I had met with him in '84, and I said, you got to do something. And so he said, we'll do some research. We'll do a report. So they sent that up to Minnesota. Minnesota says, okay, well, if every other sentence is harassment, hazing, assault, and rape, this is going to be a very long report, mostly with the same 7 words every 2 sentences. So they came up with military sexual trauma. And we get the report back, and it said, yeah, this is bad. And we said, it's way worse than what they came up with. And so we kept going forward, and we finally started testifying before Congress. We got a hearing. And after the second or third hearing, I don't even remember, it's been so long ago. It's after the second or third hearing, they said, okay, we're going to find out what the hell is going on in the military. This cannot be happening. And we said, okay. So we did a hearing in 1991, and we had the Joint Chiefs there, the entire Joint Chiefs. And they said, well, we don't think it's quite this bad and all of that. And I said, I'm really glad that you're thinking that, but this is the tip of the iceberg. And then we also testified about tailhook. And we said, if you think that this isn't happening everywhere, you're wrong. The only reason this came forward, and Paula was very clear about this as well, when we were going forward on the whole thing on tailhook, is this was a private organization, the tailhook organization, in a private hotel with a private catering company, and that's the reason the lawsuits went forward, is because the military couldn't do anything about it. And there were gazillions of pictures, and people started talking. And so it was hard, but people went forward with it, and it was a very proud time because we finally, in 1991, got the legislation through. In 92, it went into effect. And what I will tell you is Steph said, do not leave this part out. And I said, okay. She said, tell them about the bathrooms. I said, all right. And there's the motivation. Women had a lot of motivation, more so than most of the men at the time, because they were just going to get their lives trashed, and we were going to finally get some kind of services. When I went to the VA, the first time I went to the VA was 1980. They said, we don't service women here. And I said, I'm not asking to be serviced. I'm asking to be seen by a physician. That's exactly what I said to this guy. And they said, but we don't do that. And I said, you will do that. I am a veteran. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm an honorably discharged veteran. You will see me. And they didn't see me. I went back to Akaka. That's when I started seeing Akaka on a regular basis, as did others. And so then we fought to get bathrooms. We didn't have bathrooms at the VA. You could go outside the director's office, and you could go to the bathroom outside the cafeteria. There was no safety or security for women. And if you did go in the hospital, that's why when the VA says we've been serving women for 95 years, 100 years, 75, we're like, no, you haven't. When somebody's dying, you will put them in a bed in a nursing home or in a soldier's home or in a VA for a minute until they die, and then it's done. But you will not provide us with regular services. We didn't start getting GYNs, OBGYNs at the VA hospitals until the last 10 years, and most of them still don't have them. So we don't have reproductive health care. So if somebody gets raped, if something happens and they need to go in and they need a forensic exam, we don't have
Diana
forensic
does
nursing.
live very rural.
There's a handful of them
I
in the
live
entire
rural.
country
She
in the
lives
VA
4 to
facilities
6
and in the
hours
military
away from a
facilities. So we don't have it.
rural.
So reproductive health care is a big
for
deal.
internet is still dial-up, I believe.
During those testimonies, when we were talking to all of them, we said, are you planning to make it possible for us to have mammograms and to have pap smears and to have pelvic exams and to have our reproductive care
sanitized
taken care of?
version.
Because active duty only had one kind of birth control. You got that or you got nothing.
As clean
and
as
they would give
something
you
can be
condoms.
in a topic like
That
this.
was it. There wasn't anything
but the
else.
tailhook scandal
And
was
so
around 1991.
this has been a real long time of trying to bring some things to fruition to deal with reproductive health care.
And I
all
think
of it is a
Marine
problem.
Corps
Every bit of it
officers
is a
who were
problem.
alleged to have
So,
assaulted up to
I don't know if my screen froze.
80 plus women
I don't know what happened.
and some men.
Are we still on?
At a
I think we got
conference
lost
in
again.
Las Vegas, Nevada, actually, where I was stationed.
I'm going to
Not
try to get back in.
91, but I believe that's a sanitized summary of what the tailhook scandal is that Diana was referencing for those watching who may not be aware.
I do want to go through a list of scandals, though, so that people don't think it's just Tailhook. Tailhook was the first of many. After Tailhook was Aberdeen in 1996. Drill sergeants were accused and convicted of abusing trainees. The Air Force Academy scandal that took place in 2003, where dozens of cadets reported sexual assaults and retaliation after reporting. Lackland Air Force Base scandal in 2011 through 2013. Military training instructors were charged and convicted for assaulting or exploiting trainees. The Marines United nude photo scandal in 2017. Fort Hood, Vanessa Guillen's case in 2020 that we all know about, but there was multiple other cases that year that nobody knows about. And then there's the ongoing Pentagon sexual assault crisis reports that happen every year when we decide to release them, which we're supposed to do, and we don't anymore. Lisa, I'm going to let you go, and then I want Steph to give today's statistics for everybody watching. You're muted.
Or the ones that were found out, right? Like those are the ones that are widely publicized. And I'm sure probably Steph might get into this a little bit with her statistics. It is known that, it's also widely underreported, MST, and, so let me pass it over to Steph.
Everybody. So this is going to be my first time I do this. So I'm going to share my screen, and that way you guys can see what I see. Because I'm pulling this up from the reports from actually I just downloaded this one, but from the sapper.mil website, and so that you could see what I'm seeing. The most latest reports that are out is for FY 2024. They have not released last year's. They're almost late. Usually they release them every April. Last year they actually released them, I believe, on May 1st. So we'll see how that one goes. We've talked about doing another one of these when we get an update as well. And one of the biggest things that it's good to see here are the lines of the total reports, the restricted and unrestricted. Should I do a brief overview of restricted and unrestricted just in case?
Yes, for all of our civilians watching, they don't know what any of that means.
Yep, no problem, because restricted and unrestricted has changed in definition a little bit, or at least a little bit of coverage over the years. For filing a report, you're supposed to fill out the same form, and then you get a choice of whether you want to do it restricted or unrestricted. Restricted means the only people that actually find out are the person that you reported it to, which is typically the victim advocate or the SARC, and the medical personnel that help process the report. And then it really just stays with the system and it doesn't go anywhere. You just want to make sure it's basically the plan is to have them reported, and then they go about their life like nothing happened, which is often what victims want, especially because a lot of the times when victims go through and experience sexual violence, it's within the workplace. It's within the area and the people that they work with every day. So having to report that unrestricted, and then you go back into work after a lot of people find out about it, can be very scary. So having the restricted option helps a lot of victims and survivors have that choice of control as well. Unrestricted means pretty much the military police will find out, and that gets reported over to those people, and then they start processing investigations. The command team does find out as well. Often they don't get all of the details and all the information that's given, and it'll actually be processed for adjudication. Hopefully that there is some justice down the road. There are some benefits to filing unrestricted versus restricted, because if you file unrestricted, you can get a PCS, a move from your location within a time frame. So that way you can feel that safety and security being removed from your workplace. Okay, there's that information. Let me move back to this. Okay. So
Wait a
there
minute
are,
before you move on. See, one of our lawyers has their hands raised.
yes, go
Yeah,
ahead and
I just
correct
wanted to
me.
pop in stuff because this chart is
Correct me.
beautiful. So the thing I just wanted to highlight too,
Mhm.
you see a couple spikes here. Like
Yeah.
there's a steady incline, and there's a spike in 2012 and 2013 that I think is important, and then the one in 2020 and 2021. So as we're talking about, like, the arc of this is to, like, keep this in the conversation. In 2012 is when The Invisible War came out, right? Which was a film that documented military sexual trauma, to an really the horrific nature of it. It's at Sundance Film Festival. And when that happened, that really emboldened a lot of folks to report. And then we see again the steady incline. And then again with the murder of Vanessa Guillen in 2020, we see another sharp increase. So I just wanted to, Stephanie has such a great thing that you pulled up. I wanted to just really throw that in, that the more we're talking about this, the better, because that's what's getting folks, or that's helping folks speak truth to power.
Steph, you're muted. But B, Brian, do you want to pop in before Steph goes over
Did not need.
Yeah, for sure. As with anything, Steph mentioned that unrestricted reporting can give you a move. However, the Army and I believe I want to say the Air Force, but I know the Army for sure, there are several exceptions to that. I had a client once who was on a flag in the Army, and that flag kept that client from receiving a PCS move. It hasn't been fixed. So as long as and that's not the only exception, I want to be clear, there's several others. But as long as you have these exceptions, you're going to see problems in people making decisions. You're also going to have, there are also a whole host of other reasons people choose restricted versus unrestricted reporting. Too many to go into, but do keep in mind that sometimes the exceptions can swallow the rules. So that's why we're having so much problems nowadays. Also, as much as I hate to mention this, my integrity kind of forces me to. There was another movie that was released, I want to say like 2 years after The Invisible War. The movie was called Justice Denied, and it highlighted a lot of things to do with male survivors. So that is also out there. It may or may not have an effect on the trend lines that you see. Thanks.
Brian, thank you for sharing that movie title. We will be sure to drop it in the chat for everybody to watch. Male survivors need to be highlighted, often forgotten about. Steph, go ahead with statistics.
Okay, thank you. For some reason, it's been automatically turning the mute on, so that is very frustrating. If I don't talk for a certain time frame, it'll turn on. I just watched it do that. Okay. So yes, I was going to go into that information with the Invisible War and the spikes as well, but with the reporting, the earliest that there have been has actually been 2006, but the type of data that they have been pulling is a little bit, they define things differently when they pull the data. So things are a little bit changed if you try to use the parameters and standards of trying to compare it. So a lot of people go back to 2011 because that's when they have been doing it more consistently and to a similar standard. So yes, 2012 is when the spike did happen. 2013 is also when they started having all of those congressional hearings. General, I can never pronounce his name right, Ordinero. There's probably a different way to pronounce his name, but the chief of staff, he did a lot of hearings during 2013, and they came out with a lot of different legislation at that time frame, and that was the start of the victim advocates, all of the other training that was happening at that time frame. So you get a little bit of a plateau between 2014 and 2016. And personally, I was actually trained during that time frame. And one of the reasons why I think that happened is because that took the funding a while to get to the units and all of the training. So that way, once you started actually training victim advocates and having them assigned to the units, you will start receiving more reports because the assaults are still happening. They just didn't know who to report to. They didn't have anyone to report their issues with. So that happened when I became a brigade SARC for an engineer brigade for the Army Reserve, and it was actually during the time when they started integrating women into combat roles, and we had combat engineer companies under our brigade. That I didn't see an increase on percentage on that way, but that's also one of the time frames that also happened during that time. And during that time frame in 2015 and up was when we started integrating women into combat roles. So, and then some of the other spikes that happened, yes, especially 2020 with Vanessa Guillen, and there was a lot of other things that came out there, the social media with the hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen. There was I think it's Netflix. There was a bunch of other things that was popping out after that. And then you slowly see the reporting kind of tapers off. But I'm going to take us down to another statistic further down the way. Oh yeah, if you didn't know, you can actually file reports for sexual assault prior to military service as well. And from what I believe, that prior to military service also includes your time frame when you are a recruit before you're actually gone to basic training. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the time frame that can be worked. That's when that's counted. And there is a lot of sexual assault that does happen with recruits and also JROTC and senior ROTC cadets that are not counted here. I will warn you that is not counted. And so that's something that I wish that they start doing. And it's very frustrating that they haven't gotten to that part yet, but they are starting to do some studies. So here's another great statistic. You can see the reporting at the bottom with the red line and the blocks. But then when you look higher up, every 2 years, except for, 2018 to, calendar year 2021, that's because of COVID, they weren't able to do their surveys. That is when they try to do a prevalence of how much sexual assault is probably happening. It's an estimation. It's one of their surveys. They do it every other year because it is kind of expensive and very laborsome to do those type of studies. Anybody that's taken sociology classes probably know what these things look like with their surveys and stuff. But then you get a good idea of how many people that have been assaulted versus how many people have actually filed their reports. And that's what the percentages are. Actually, it's those people that have actually experienced by percentage, by demographic. And then you see the people that have actually filed the reports. And the percentage above the red line are the percentage of those that have actually filed the reports out of those people that experienced. They want the higher numbers, and there was a drop, but there was also a drop in assaults. An increase in assaults as well. There was a great time frame across the board during the pandemic. And there was a hard time where leadership were not able to actually be around their troops and manage. Everything was remote. They were very isolated and removed. And to me, that's probably one of the reasons why assaults increased during that time frame, because of their inability to actually be around those troops. And then, you know what? That will cut it for me. And I will stop sharing and I will give it back to Katie.
So as we can see, one of the numbers I wanted to highlight that Steph did a good job at on that report was the data she was showing of like people actually saying that like, hey, this is happening, but it's not in that red line, was 29,000. some reports are like 50. So when we talk about like scale and scope of the epidemic across the military that nobody talks about, it is a very large scale, and it still is happening today in today's military to your son and your daughter. And so I want to open it up to Brian and Lindsay because I know that they do this work. And first, I want to share about why people closed report. One of the reasons is retaliation. Retaliation happens across the military widely. So much so that Lindsay recently received a call from me about a young woman on Fort Hood that had been connected to me through an advocate that we met in 2020 and still had my phone number and said, "Are you still doing this work?" And immediately I knew to call Lindsay Knapp and call an attorney and say, "We need help. This girl needs it." And Brian Lewis does the same type of work for women and men across our service that are facing retaliation every day for this. So Lindsay or Brian, can you tell us about the retaliation and what people face and what y'all do as lawyers to help?
I'll defer to Lindsay on this one for right now.
No,
You're muted, Liz.
it's not letting me come off mute. Let me go out and come back in.
Oh, Lindsay will come back. Brian, can you share just a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, sure. So there was a time before Article 132 UCMJ, and that time was replete with plenty of people coming forward and saying very quietly, we don't want to report because this has happened. And Congress decided, after a lot of pressure, as usually Congress does, to say, okay, we're going to create a specialized article in the UCMJ. But the problem with that article is that it requires the intent to retaliate. And intent to retaliate, proving any specific intent crime is hard. When lawyers hear the word intent, we just kind of grit our teeth a little bit and we're just like, okay, what's coming next? But that article, they kind of smashed it together a little bit with the whistleblower statute, 10 USC section 1034. And anybody that's done discharge record upgrades will tell you that the whistleblower statute for the armed forces is garbage simply because it has no teeth. Courts time and again have said that the whistleblower statute does not create any private cause of action, meaning you can't sue for it. So they were hoping to try to create something that had teeth that could, what's the right word? That a service member could go and potentially, hopefully get a charge started. But it's not been as anywhere near as effective as we'd hoped. And that I'll toss it over to Lindsay.
Hey, thanks, Brian. And sorry, I was having technical difficulties. But Katie, to kind of like loop back to something and that Steph showed in the slide, the slide was showing, about 5 or 6,000 reports of sexual assault, but then that there was likely closer to 25,000 or 30,000 reports of sexual assault. And so in that reporting too, what it also talks about is retaliation rates. So when the military's first started cataloging how many people have been were reporting retaliation after reporting a sexual assault, it was like in the 40-50%. But every year it's steadily gone up. And so by the Department of Defense's own numbers, they're reporting now that 64% of service members are experiencing retaliation after reporting a sexual assault. And so I think that's really glaring because as we're looking at the statistics, sometimes it's hard to like pin down how bad the problem is. And the retaliation rates like doubled during the time when they were launching these sexual assault response programs, right? The SAPR program, the SHARP program, the programs that were designed to help people report. But it was just not the case. So the most common things that I see in my practice when somebody comes to see me and they're experiencing retaliation for reporting a sexual assault I see like a couple different things. One, I often see that command will command refer that service member to behavioral health, and then they diagnose them with a borderline personality disorder. And so what that does is that is in like maybe civilian speak is a pre-existing condition. So what they're going to do then is they're going to try to administratively separate that service member because they're just crazy and they've been crazy the entire time, rather than diagnosing them with PTSD due to MST. And so then often I'll get the client by the time they've already entered the separation board process, and I am just going full on Karen to make that process stop. Another common scenario that I see is we all know that when a service member does actually, if they report to the, let's say their commander, that's automatically unrestricted report. That commander has to send that report immediately to law enforcement. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Immediately go, right? And so the other scenario I see is where the commander goes back to that service member and is like, meh, go back to work, right? And they're just not sending it to law enforcement at all. And so those are the cases where I'm like sitting at these congressional leaders' desks, like, like what chance did they have, right? Like that service member did everything that they should have done, right? Like if we're going to make the argument that like sexual assault just happens, right? And I'm not making that argument, but if we are, and we're saying that like it's like getting hit by a car, it happens. I can't stop everybody from getting hit by a car. Then what matters is what we do after they get hit by the car. And what the military is showing us over and over is that after somebody gets hit by this car, is that they're just boggling the process. They are deliberately sweeping it under the rug. They are deliberately sending those service members back to work with the perpetrators. They are deliberately command referring them to behavioral health with the intent to kick them out and make them look crazy and to make an example out of them. And I'll pause there. Lisa, you got your hand up.
Oh, just for a second. I was just going to follow up with what Lindsay is talking about. For those of you who are watching this live and who aren't familiar with the military, getting a mental health diagnosis like that and getting kind of pushed out the door with an administrative discharge, or a lot of times what I feel like we were seeing in some of the reporting was even a dishonorable discharge, is going to completely change the type of benefits that individual can get once they are out of the military. It's going to change their ability to get VA care for their, MST, for the symptoms that they're experiencing from the MST. Like it's incredibly significant, the fact that there has been this retaliation, and in many cases, some of that retaliation causes a dishonorable discharge, which really just betrays the member all over again. And I think that's a big thing that is also important to mention, is that when it comes to military sexual trauma, it's not only a case of this horrible event has happened to a person in the military, usually by somebody that they are working with in the military, but then the way that they are treated after they report it adds on and compiles a moral injury to that individual and causes even more issues. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, Lindsay.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks. Lisa brought something interesting out, and it needed to be addressed now. I really want our listening audience to be very careful about using the right terminologies on discharges. When Lisa mentioned people receiving a dishonorable discharge, usually what we see is a prevalence of other than honorable discharges. A dishonorable discharge requires the action of a general court-martial, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some of that happening. But to convene a general court-martial, there's a ton of paperwork, and somebody like me or Lindsay is going to catch that fairly early in the process, go stand on that general JAG's office desk, and probably just smack them about the head until they stop it and do something. But I'm sure when we get on later on into talking about how people can address this, we'll come back to the topic of discharges, but I wanted to clear that one up right away, because people, especially in veteran spaces, get imprecise about the type of discharge somebody has, and not being precise makes a real difference later on down the line. Thanks.
Yeah, and I've had two cases where the service member is at risk of a dishonorable discharge. One was, and I think it's of note because one was a veteran that served what I would call like a legacy case that served in like the 70s and 80s, and then just in 2020 went to upgrade their discharge. It was a male service member who was sexually assaulted by their medical provider. And then after that assault, he just went AWOL. And so he was court-martialed and all, and he just never came back. We were able to upgrade his discharge, though, and get him his benefits. And the other one is a more recent case. The case, if we Google the case of Tae-oo, her story has been memorialized in a mini Hulu documentary called Battle Cry. But Tae-oo was a Marine who, after she reported her sexual assault, she experienced a significant amount of retaliation and was thrown in the brig and put in solitary confinement for more than 300 days. And she was facing a dishonorable discharge, which went through the court-martial process. She ended up taking a plea, though, in order to get out of solitary confinement. But absolutely, Brian, like, language does matter. And if you're going through the potential of a dishonorable discharge, you are really going through it.
Yeah, and people really do go through it. We all know, sitting here, the trauma spiral, right? Is we all go through a trauma spiral, and it lands us in some very unique places sometimes. And, especially with males, I have a personal battle buddy, and I'm going to share a personal story. And it's something I like to talk about because it's one of the problems in the military. The reason that sexual assault is so prevalent is that we accept ambient sexual harassment. And all of us sitting here knows what that means. And so I'm going to explain it. There is a culture within the military that it is okay to tell inappropriate jokes. It is okay to watch people get harassed and you don't say anything. There's a culture of that. And I am guilty of that. And it ended in a dishonorable discharge for a battle buddy of mine, a male. We were out in Korea, South Korea. Everybody on this panel knows is buck wild for the military. You either gain rank or you lose everything while you're there. I ended up in prison, so that's how wild it gets. He was sexually assaulted one night while we were out. We woke up in a place, don't know how we got there still to this day. It was a male full bird's house, had sexually assaulted our battle buddy, and we said nothing. We said nothing for years. And he trauma spiraled and ended up getting dishonorably discharged for drug usage in Korea. And it's pretty hard to find drugs in Korea. Like, not that we were like searching. I wasn't. But it is a difficult task. And so when we say dishonorable discharges, most of the time it is a Tay case. It is my buddy's Jake's case, where something happened to him. People around him did not have the integrity to do the right thing for their battle buddy. And then his life was ruined for years. And I have begged him to go get an upgrade, that everybody there would write a letter of what actually happened that night. And still, and so when we look at these things as adults years later, this happened 15 years ago now, as people that watch it and then see the outcomes for our battle buddies, like, it's time that we do better and we say better. Right? Because watching our battle buddies lose all their benefits is not the right way to go. And so I just wanted to share that, because that is the bigger problem here that nobody talks about, is the culture. Right? Like, the culture in the military needs to change and it needs to shift. And when people are like, the military shouldn't go woke, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, right? Steph, go ahead.
Okay, so I found another statistic. Okay, the data nerd in me. So there is what people may not know, or if you know, the RAND Corporation, they do a lot of studies. They do a ton of lovely studies that the DoD loves to pay for, which also is very helpful. A lot of leaders really do enjoy using that. Whatever they come out with, it gives us a lot of really good information. While I was serving, I was obsessed with the RAND Corporation. So they did a study on what the sexual assault risk is based on the work environments. And I apologize, my cat is trying to say something too. So for service women's sexual assault risk increased more than a factor of 1.5 when they worked in environments where rates of ambient sexual harassment against women and men were above average, compared with the sexual assault risk of women working in rates that were below average. And with men's sexual assault risk was increased by a factor of 1.8 when working in such environments as well. So that the ambient sexual harassment increases the risk of the assault. And I can't remember another study, but there is another study out there that when there is a higher rate of sexual harassment that's happening in the workplace, there are a lot of other crimes that are being committed as well. When I was a sexual assault response coordinator, I helped out one investigator for a sexual harassment complaint because he didn't know what he was doing. Thankfully, now you're supposed to have trained investigators for those things, but back then they weren't. And so it was a little difficult back then, and I was helping him. When we were there, we found like a ton of other crap that was happening within that battalion and had to let the EEO go and take over because there was a lot more stuff happening on top of all of that sexual harassment issues. So just wanted to put my 2 cents in with my data. Okay.
Dee, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I am concerned about the hypermasculinity with women in the military because that contributes too. And it also keeps people from talking about the issues at hand, especially harassment. It's like if you are going through hypermasculine environments that are super, super masculine and women are trying to match that, it makes the harassment worse. And then there's just not enough people coming forward to say, stop it. What are you doing? This is not okay. And if women, it's like, do 20 pull-ups. And they're like, okay. So they learn how to do 20 pull-ups. And when the guys can do 4. And so they're worse than the men sometimes. And I think we have to look at the fact that women are not helping each other and men aren't helping each other when we allow hazing and harassment to continue at these rampant rates, especially with this stupid culture that's going on right now of we're war fighters. I never heard that in my damn life except in a comic book until Hegseth got into the Pentagon. We're war fighters. It's like, what is wrong with you? We're supposed to be maintaining the peace, not starting crap with people. We have blown up more munitions. We've blown up shit we don't have just to be war fighters. So this is a problem. This is a problem. And I don't think it's getting better because I'm talking to people who are telling me that the rates of sexual harassment are really, really bad at this juncture because Sharp, Sapro, and Sark are almost gone. They're just gone. They're not bringing people in. They're not doing an MOS. They're getting rid of all their stuff. They don't have supplies. And they're afraid to do anything because they're considered woke. Good God, how are we going to get a handle on this? And they're putting LGBTQIA women, minorities out of the military like candy. They're like, we're a Pez dispenser, throwing generals and admirals and senior officers and senior enlisted, men and women of color and LGBTQIA. I've seen so many of my trans friends thrown out, and I'm mortified. I'm absolutely mortified. I don't even know how we're supposed to deal with 17,000 people being thrown out because of their preferences and because of where their heart is. That's just not right. And I know that the gay community is next. It's absolutely next. This is going to be a white, male, straight environment just doing all kinds of illegal crap. And it's terrible. I mean, I'm just telling you, this is what I see happening. It's pretty scary, I think.
Yeah. It is. It's pretty scary. And with our current climate and our current administration and everything that is going on, like you all have been saying tonight, right? It's honestly like in 2020 and before, like so many across this country, like I was watching the story of Vanessa Guillen like unfolding in Fort Hood, Texas, where I had been stationed, not stationed there. My husband was. That was where I went to right after I got out of the military. And to me, I was like, I want to crawl under a rock and not think about the military at all. But I went to Fort Hood, like the worst place, right? And I remember thinking that this is not just one tragedy, right? As a combat veteran and as a first generation Mexican immigrant, like her story felt so deeply personal to me. Vanessa was a young Latina daughter of immigrants like myself, like someone who raised her right hand and trusted the institution, right, that we all served, just like I did. Her parents trusted the institution to take care of her, like so many other parents do. And what shook me is that what mobilized really most of us was not just what happened to her, it was what came after, right? Was the realization that so many stories that never made the headlines, like we were talking about earlier, right? So many that never made the headlines. So many men that are out there that are still not making the headlines. That the moment that drew me into Vanessa Guillen's movement was what we saw was really not just outrage, but it was courage. It was courage from women and men across all ranks, across all branches, and who, like, for years really had been silent, right? Many out of fear, like some of you have said all over here, fear for retaliation, for not being believed. I myself, like that was one of the things, for not being believed, right? Fear of losing their careers. A lot of it was also cultural, because internally it was like, no, what is my family going to think? Right? Like, no, I'm going to have to like make everybody believe me. Like, I don't have any proof. And suddenly, like, we all began to speak. We began to share it, and it was COVID, right? So how are we sharing this? Social media, Zoom, groups that we began to form. Like, I think we were having Zoom meetings in the middle of the night, like all kinds of different time zones. I think that was the support systems like that we began to form, right? And I'm sorry I'm going long-winded, but all of this was just, and so like we all began to share the stories of harassment, assault, intimidation that happened along the different chains of command, motor pools, gyms, basic training, everything. And all of a sudden we realized, oh shit, I'm not by myself. This is happening to everybody. I thought it was just me. And it was more than just that, right? It was a systemic failures. It was the what it meant to really like navigate a system that it was crap. Where when you reported something, it could come like a personal cost, right? And that today has not stopped. But you know what else hasn't stopped? The courage. The courage, like all of you in this room and a whole bunch of people watching tonight or may watch later on, right? The courage, it has not stopped. From all the scandals from history and the shit that continues, like the Epstein files, right? That is our leadership. That is a culture that exists in this country. Because guess what shapes how people behave and how people respond? Our freaking leadership. And if we have leaders that say, like, the wokeness, right? That say, well, maybe, we don't have to be all soft. Or maybe you can spank them or do this in basic training and do that, right? We can go back to that. What? Like, do we feel safe to report? Do families trust the system to investigate, with transparency? Like, do I feel safe to like tell people, yeah, you should join the military? And so this work is not abstract, right? It's about people, it's about families, it's about the promise that we make when someone raises their right hand and to serve this country. The work that I do in my advocacy for immigration, for military sexual assault, for suicide prevention, it all intersects. And that's why, like, social work for me, macro social work, like, it's my love language. It's my love language. And Lisa, you have your hand raised.
Are you done, Dee?
Yes, I can be.
Okay.
I know. I get long-winded. I'm sorry. My social worker hat, it was just like,
No, I want your social worker hat on there because, again, I just feel like I'm reiterating some of the things and explaining to some of our civilian folks who might be watching situations, right? So for those of you who are watching who don't understand how, we've talked about how there's this history of MST in the military. For a while there, they were like really pushing training, like everything was about the training, but training only goes so far when there's no accountability. And one of the huge statistics that we were highlighting back in 2020 after Vanessa Guillen was the fact that out of the reported cases, the ones that actually were going to court-martial, I think it was like less than 5% were actually being found guilty or having some form of punishment, I guess you could call it, whether they were kicked out or whatever. There were individuals, including in the Air Force, who pled guilty and they would get demoted a rank and then get to be allowed to retire, right? So these types of things were a huge issue. And in 2020, when we started mobilizing, the way it worked in the military was, I want you to think like, let's say you work at Target or pick Starbucks or some other, civilian business, and someone sexually harasses you or sexually assaults you. And the police go to your boss at your store and say, do you want to press charges? Because you get to make the decision. That's a very simplified version of what was going on in the military, but commanders were in the chain, in the decision-making chain. And so when we all mobilized in 2020 and in 2021 and finally got changes because of the Vanessa Guillen Act, because of Vanessa Guillen and the mobilization, and got changes put into the military and through the NDAA, it was to have an independent group of people who made those decisions, with the judge advocate generals, basically, separate from the command structure. And I think that's important to understand because now there is kind of concern as to whether with the current administration and the way that things have been shaking out with wanting to kind of change the focus of JAG, from Hegseth and things like that, and whether or not, I'm sure many of us in this space are really, really curious to see what happens to those reporting numbers if that report finally gets released again.
I want to kind of circle back before I let Brian go, because I think it's important what Dee said about how we all came together so kind of haphazardly. Right. It was during COVID. I live in Florida. My state was not participating in COVID. As a state, we just said it's not real. And so Diana is laughing because I had put across social media platforms of like, who wants to go to Hood? Like I am a victim survivor of Hood. And I wanted to go to Hood and publicly name one of my rapists because I wanted to own my story. And, so we just kind of put it up on Facebook, and then people were like, COVID. And I was like, oh yeah, it does exist. And mind you, my dad died from COVID like 3 months before all of this happened. And it was just such a powerful movement of service women who serve, and Lindsay and Lulac, and like everybody just kind of coming together in a Facebook group and being like, let's fix this. Like, let's put all of our power into fixing this issue. And then you hear the stories and we sit here and we talk about the history. But, I heard so many stories during that time frame that keep me up at night. Like nurses during Vietnam being locked in the ground and used as sex slaves. The report's there. Google it. It was made public. or hearing of, and Brian touched on this, and so did Steph, like very minimally. Those reports and what we were finding out in a scope we didn't even think about was MEPS, the Military Entrance Processing Station. When you go to MEPS and you're seen by civilians and you're sexually assaulted by the civilian, but you're not in the military, who the fuck do you report to? The police or military spouses? Who do they report to? Or cadets? There was a scandal here at UNF with someone I know personally who was sexually assaulted in the cadet program. Those numbers are not in the reports. So when we talk about scope as advocates and pissed off survivors that came together to fix shit, like these are the numbers that nobody talks about. We weren't even talking about spouses until a spouse reached out to us and said, who do we report to? There's a whole group of us over here in this Facebook group, and we're talking about it. While we're also getting connected to active duty women who started their own fucking Facebook group at the time. And so it was a collective effort of Me Too military style. But it was such a powerful moment in this country's history, and it didn't even make national news. It was the first time that women veterans, male veterans came together to talk about sexual assault across the country on a large-scale mobilization, and to see all of our work undone. I know I'm heartbroken. I know I dedicated a lot of time to this, and one of the scales I want to bring up that nobody talks about enough is the VA. Reporting at the VA, therapy at the VA, and people getting sexual assaulted at the VA by providers and other veterans, because it's happening and nobody's talking about it. I want to talk about the reporting system at the VA, because the VA reporting system is one of the more abhorrent, re-traumatizing things I think most of us went through to try and explain sexual assault, right, in the military. And I want to get to Brian. I saw you put your hand down. One of the things I hate, and I know is a pet peeve of mine, I don't know about everybody on this panel, can we stop calling it MST and call it fucking rape? Rape is a felony. Like, we are like giving cutesy terms to felonies, and nobody knows what the fuck MST is outside of our circles. So that's my one ask. Brian.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said about connection, the internet in most of the phases since the internet became a real thing was essential in building connection. I'm thinking back to the old days of the Yahoo group Vet Well. I'm thinking about the early Facebook stuff where like 2012, 2013, the first and second Swan conferences and the Facebook groups that built off of that. Then when momentum kind of stopped, you touched on the 2020 stuff, but it's all, at least in the newer instances, it's been about people using it to start connections, using the internet to start connections, and then it kind of takes off for a life of its own. Something else that was mentioned, and I want to go back to the social workers on this. One thing that hasn't really been studied at all, or with limited exceptions, is male survivors and their need for services that are different and what may work differently than female survivors. And I think that it's not been profitable enough for companies such as RAND, for companies such as for the research arm of VA to do studies on male survivors' needs. And we're missing an important part about how to treat close to 50% of the sexual assault population. As far as the VA personally, my suggestion is to shut the entire health side down, give us insurance, and let us go get real therapists with real things. But we can have that argument later. The real thing that comes along that line is the blind eye that is institutionally turned toward male survivors. And my first experience with that was a woman by the name of Agnes Bresnahan, who saved a space for me in a important place and paid a price for it. So just something to think about in terms of the how do we help men circle. Thanks.
Lindsay, I'm going to let you go. I do want to do a very quick shout out because I saw someone comment in the live chat that did the other portion of 2020. So in 2020, we were like the protesting arm because I find it cathartic to scream at people in the street with a purpose. It's really good for my PTSD. Without a purpose, I'm just crazy. And so while we were building this, Lucy, who is watching, Delgadio, who commented, "Hey, Lucy, I hope everybody that is watching Googles that woman's name and watches her testify on this subject." As I was driving to Fort Hood across the country, I was listening to Lucy as an empowerment tool to go lead a protest at Fort Hood. And so, Lucy, thank you for watching. And, we miss you. I hope when we do the new update, you will come on and tell us, what's going on with you. And Lindsay, go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of echo some of the stuff that you were mentioning, Katie, and also Brian, about the lack of support for our male survivors. I often send folks to our male survivors in particular to an organization called 1 in 6. 1 in every 4 women experience sexual assault, but 1 in every 6 men experience sexual assault. And Dr. David Lesak is a survivor of sexual assault, and he founded that organization, and they do a lot of online support groups for men and a lot of virtual work. I mean, it's certainly not enough, but they're doing a great job. And they're also a private organization. And as we're kind of like talking about language too, like, calling it rape or calling it sexual assault or military sexual trauma, one of the things that they found, particularly with the men, when they're trying to identify survivors, if you will, is when they started to call it, when they began to ask the question, have you experienced unwanted sexual contact? People were like, yeah, definitely. But when asked the question, have you experienced sexual assault or have you experienced rape? It was often, and this is for men and women, or women as well, I should say. Sometimes it's hard to identify that it happened to us, right? A protective mechanism that we often have is that happens to other people. Right. That doesn't, even though it happens to 1 in 4, 1 in 6 of us, it didn't, not to me though. Right. I did something different. Right. That didn't happen. So I often use the term unwanted sexual contact because it kind of helps lower the barriers when I'm kind of working with folks to have them, and then is maybe a gentler way to enter the conversation, as we're trying to provide advocacy or support or anything else. But I'll punt it back to you, friend.
Thank you for name dropping that organization, because I think the more information that gets out there of how to help our brothers in arms and where they can go is important, right? Is because it is a subject that's not talked about because of the stigma attached. And that's why you see mostly women on the panel, and you see mostly women arguing for advocacy and change. It's not because it's a women's issue. It's because women in uniform know the stigma attached. And so therefore we know that it is our responsibility as a unit and as a team to help them. Right? Because if we help them, we help us. And so I do want to point that out. The VA process, though, I think has been somewhat traumatic for us all. I know the VA process for myself was very strange. I'm going to tell a quick story about CNP, and then I'm going to open it up. So what CNP is a compensation and pension exam. It's a medical exam you go through when you claim a disability at the VA. So what you do is you're like, hey, I'm disabled. This is what I'm disabled with. And then they set you up with a human being, either a doctor. It should be a doctor. Is it? Who fucking knows? So I have a separate appointment specifically for PTSD due to MST. I show up to a third-party vendor, which happens often. And the third-party vendor is in a nail salon. There is pictures to prove this, a VA whistleblower report by myself. I show up to a nail salon. I am utterly confused as to what is happening in my life. I think I am being punked. I walk in. Nope. There's a list for the VA appointment sign-in. So I sign my name on the list, sit down. I start texting a group chat full of other veterans, making sure that I am not crazy, and taking pictures of people getting pedicures and the massage table on the right and nail polish being done. And they escort me to a back room. It is literally a storage closet. My back is against an emergency exit door, and there is a man who introduces himself to me as so-and-so. I am here to do your CNP exam. I am utterly confused at this point. And if you know me well, people on this call know me well enough. When I get utterly confused, you can tell. Like my mouth is agape and my head tilts a little bit as to what's happening. And so I ask, what is happening here? And he said, oh, yeah, but we're just going to do your CNP exam. Cool. CNP exams should be, and they are paid for, 1 hour. 1 full hour. 8 to 10 minutes, I was out the door. Walked out, drove myself straight to the VA on Jefferson Street in Jacksonville, Florida, to the patient care advocate. Told her what happened, provided pictures, and said, so about that. She immediately called Washington. I filed a whole report. And instead of them saying anything normal, they were like, we'll just reschedule your exam. Problem being is I didn't want a new exam. At that point, angry Katie came out. I wanted to understand who oversaw third-party contracts. Who exactly in the federal government would approve a nail salon address as somebody that can perform CNP exams? And come to find out, there is no oversight. And so that is one of the problems with the VA. As you have traumatized people going through, you have issues. And I know Lisa, I see her like itching. Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, no. I have multiple episodes. Nail are basically making you relive your trauma, and it can be a detriment to individuals actually reporting because they don't want to relive their trauma. It's not as simple as just saying, hey, you can see, and sometimes there aren't medical records to back it up because the individual may not have reported it in the military due to the myriad of issues that we have been talking about here tonight, including retaliation or being ostracized by your unit. So sometimes people don't even report, but it's not enough for them to just look through your records and identify, like, maybe you were, like, you can even point out, like, hey, I was having disciplinary issues around this time and it was due to X, Y, and Z. You can get buddy statements, but being told that you need to relive that trauma can be a huge detriment. I will say, and I don't do this very often, but I will say something good about the VA. Is that even if you don't have a disability percentage, you can get, let me caveat this, you can still be treated for MST at the VA. Problem being is that right now, there's a huge staffing shortages, and there's a huge staffing shortages of mental health professionals. So actually getting care for that would probably be very difficult. But the one good thing about the VA is that you don't even have to have applied for it disability-wise to get treatment for it. So that is one good thing.
Steph?
Okay. All right. So, this for my mental health. I'm sorry. I was so excited because I've had a good experience with what happened with the VA because when I was living in Panelists Park, Florida, Tampa Bay, I lived 20-minute drive from a VA. I could drive another 30 minutes for another VA, and there was a ton of different clinics, but there was still a huge shortage of therapists and mental health professionals. And I went through 3 mental health professionals in a 13-month period because of the turnover rate. And by the third one that I actually went with, and he said that he was leaving in a couple of weeks, and I was about to be on my 4th, he's like, I'm going to refer you to community care because you need long-term treatment. And I also needed more treatment than what they could give me because scheduling. And also when you're in treatment with many VA clinics, especially for mental health clinics, they have a very structured way of how they're supposed to be doing their therapy. It's not, this works for you, we're going to do it for you. Everybody is like treated the same and you got to do the same thing. And not everybody's like that. I'm definitely not like that because I'm pretty sure I'm on the spectrum and a bunch of other issues. So I need a little bit different. I'm a little special. Mama told me that. So I just need a little bit of more help. I'm sorry. I also used to be a comedian, so I can't help myself when that comes out. And when I was submitted out to the community care, I found a facility, and thank God I found this woman, and I was able to see her weekly. And for about 13 months straight, through probably one of the hardest times of my life, that I was able to see her very regularly and sometimes twice a week if I needed her. And you just can't see that on the VA, but with community care, you can get that type of care. You just got to know how to ask for it. And there are exceptions. Everybody thinks that, oh, I can get an appointment within 30 days, or I live this close to a VA. I don't fit into the community care realm. No, there are some more exceptions in there, and those doctors can help you fill out that paperwork, or at least get that submitted so you can get the care you need. You just got to ask, and I wanted to give that little good news story. Thanks.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit about the evidence piece of VA claim for PTSD. A few years back, and I'm sure Diana can chime in on the year better than I can, a lot of people went to Congress and said, hey, VA does not have evidence, does not have a regulation saying what type of evidence is admissible for a PTSD claim based on sexual assault in the military. So VA put one out through what's called a fast letter, and did that in, I want to say it's like 2008 or so, 2009. And after that, this evidence letter came out and listed like 13 different types of evidence. Part of the problem comes with implementation, and it was applied unevenly across, all the different offices that do VA claims, all the regional offices, and then applied even more inconsistently by the members of the Board of Veterans Appeals. A lot of people say, oh no, BVA has judges. No, they do not. They have lawyers that can be called judges, but they're not actually trained and certified Title V judges, or what we call real administrative law judges. That aside, in the comments, I'll drop what the current regulation is for all of the different types of evidence they can use. So as you're thinking about a potential VA claim or a potential appeal, be thinking about the evidence, be thinking about how that evidence connects to the trauma, and how does that hit you now. Katie talked a little bit about where her claim took place, but in addition to where is also the write-up that goes with it. And sometimes those write-ups can be real abysmal. I get my hand on a, claim file, doesn't matter how big, I'm immediately running for that write-up for the narrative reason. And I'll see veteran indicates no current distress. Yeah, that's because you asked, how are you feeling now? So there are traps built into that system. So keep that in mind as you're encountering this process. Also, to go back, I know, to the social worker side of people, it's also important how your providers write notes. If they're just trying to balance, session was held, service member discussed blank, instead of describing some of those things. And there's good reasons and bad, but there's kind of a lot of good reasons and bad reasons that go into why we see some of the abysmal claims and appeals that are turned out. So thanks. Crap, that's not what I want to do.
So the VA process for civilians watching it doesn't make sense to veterans. It doesn't make sense to people who do it for a living, right? Because VA math is not 1 + 1 = 2. VA math is its own entity. There's all those videos out there about like girl math. Like VA math is a real thing. And when you're going through this process and you're trying to link all of these problems that you have to illnesses, it gets very, very confusing. And it's built that way. so that we get confused, we get frustrated, and then we just say, fuck it. Right. And a lot of us do that. And so for the last section, I do want to get into where do we think we go from here? Where we are at a time where sexual assaults are prevalent again in the military. Women are being murdered again openly. We have more retaliation than ever. Want to say the number one thing that I think needs to happen is a reckoning in the military of accountability. And Lisa touched on this a little bit earlier, but we didn't delve into it. What I mean by accountability is Lisa touched on the Air Force general that was retired with full benefits after being convicted of sexual assault in the military and a UCMJ court martial. Accountability looks like all of them who are convicted get no benefits and no pay. I know when we were looking into this in 2020, I was surprised to see that the state of Florida had never kicked anybody out of the National Guard for sexual assault. Ever. There are plenty of senior NCOs in the military that cover for each other. There are, unfortunately, a lot of women in the military that are part of the issue. There's a myriad of things that we can fix, but I think number one is accountability. Is that we hold people accountable. I say this to people when I talk about MST, which is often, why is it every woman I know has a story and not every man knows a rapist? Why? Why is it that when we did this in 2020, nine females I served with were raped by the same person in Korea, including myself? Because we didn't talk about it amongst ourselves, right? And accountability is bringing that truth to light and owning it. I think that is number one, is accountability amongst our ranks and amongst each other. And that's even at the VA, when our male battle buddies are still acting inappropriately towards women veterans. What do y'all think? Diana, go ahead. Diana doesn't know how to raise her hand.
You're already there. You're going to get punched here at the right spot, huh?
I agree. Lindsay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not that I can add to that, Diana, but I'm going to try. Archbishop Desmond Tutu had a great saying, as we're pulling people out of the river, we got to start asking why they're getting pushed in. And I feel like how the military handles sexual assault in the military, it's like that, like they're throwing us life jackets, but never acknowledging that they're the ones pushing us in. So I'm in the accountability. I'm on team accountability. And I am very heartened to see the direction we're going right now as a country, because I've been in the sexual assault, domestic violence advocacy field for the last 2 decades, and I have never seen people believe survivors the way they're believing them now. And watching the American public rally behind the Epstein survivors, that was not on my bingo card. I am so happy about it, but it was not on my bingo card. If you would have told me in 2026 was the year that people were going to finally believe survivors, and because this Epstein thing isn't new to those of us in the advocacy field, this is not something new to us and the things he's been doing in this group of people and other similar groups. So, I feel like a part of us is just kind of we're just kind of holding our breath, right? Until all these folks come out of power, get impeached, right? They're going to jail, most of them. And then after they go to jail, then the military's next, right? After, Trump pegs that Bondi, after all, the cabinet's taken care of. I have not taken my sights off of any of these folks in the military. And I still got some miles on these tires. I got time. I'm still alive. I'm still alive and kicking, mostly kicking. But they are banking on us quitting. Right? They thought we would have quit already. They thought Diana would have quit a long time ago, right? But Diana's still feisty. God bless her. But we carry that on with the rest of us, right? We carry that fire, because that was instilled in us by our elders, and that's not something we forgot. And we're ready to do it as long as Diana did it, and then the ones behind us the same.
Yep. Lisa, go ahead. And then I was gonna close us out. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just agreeing with what Lindsay said, that we will continue fighting hopefully as long as Diana's been fighting.
And that's
Hey,
why.
Katie, can I
Yes.
jump on this real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, friend.
So I guess the two prongs of this is military and VA. On the military side, I think a lot of work is going to come in 2028 when we start restoring some of the things that have been taken away under this administration. There's a lot of rebuilding that's going to happen, and it's basically going to be all hands on deck at that point, because as we're seeing now, a lot of people are heading for the exits and they're not going to want to come back. So it's going to need it's going to need knowledgeable people coming forward to make those changes on the DoD side. I think a large area that'll hopefully get covered is the National Guard. It is a lot of things that aren't there now will hopefully be in the next administration, the one after that, because as we've seen, it takes a decade or 2 or 3 in some cases to make change. And oh my God, there is our mascot kitty. Everybody see Diana's mascot kitty? Oh, all right, sidetrack. Coming back on. VA is a tougher animal to crack simply because the property is sometimes a federal enclave, sometimes not, which affects reporting, which affects law enforcement efforts. And people who are hurt at the VA need to be well aware of the Federal Tort Claims Act and how that can be used and misused by the VA to avoid accountability. A lot of times VA will bring people on in a contractor status. And Lindsay, go ahead, hit your head on your desk, because a contractor can't be held liable under the FTCA. And VA can't get hit for intentional torts such as assault, battery. Those are specific carve-outs in the FTCA. And you also have a very short period of time to bring that forward. So those are things that might need changing. And I'll give a shout out. I help administrate a Facebook group called VA Lies, because the VA does lie. If the VA is drawing breath, they're lying. And I remain hopeful that all the veterans that have been hurt in some fashion will see the health side close down. We'll see us get actual health care. But I think those are the two primary directions that each entity, the VA and the military, should take going forward, or are going to take. And I did want to talk real quick about the hotel thing, because if you remember 4 years ago, there was an Army colonel that got attacked at a hotel for the National Defense Forum. And she was able to hold her attacker, the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs, accountable under California state law. People, as we raise awareness, we need to be raising awareness of how people, to call them shortcuts, can take different avenues to hold people accountable, hold their attackers accountable. Thanks. That's not me either.
I think that is a very good way to close this panel out. This is going to not be the last discussion on this. I hope to do this again and talk more about ways we think we can fix the system again after we did it once. So I want to thank everybody for coming on, but we close out in a really weird manner. If it's your first time watching and you have never seen a safety brief in the military, you are about to experience something very strange and very endemic to the military. And this is our mascot, Pete the Penguin. So a safety brief is close of business every Friday. Normally, your first sergeant or commander gives you a safety brief of how not to be a degenerate over the weekend. And we are veterans and we still do a bunch of really random stuff all the time. So we have to be reminded. So we start out the same way every time. Do not beat your spouse, your child, or your pet. Drink water, take all of your medicines as prescribed, and make all of your appointments. Do your mammogram check. Please do your mammogram check. Also, check on your battle buddies. If you haven't heard from a battle buddy in a while, please reach out to them. Just check on them. Suicide is very high in our community, and we need to do a better job of reaching out. Other things, do not buy penguins on the black market and then try to donate them to the zoo. Do not conduct live fire exercises in housing developments. Do not find random plants in other cities and bring them to your home. Do not travel by scooter in packs of veterans. We don't do that well. Other things that are more important, we all took a oath to the Constitution, right? It was not about party. It was not about man. It was not about any of that. It was to the Constitution, actually to the people of this country. And so as many of us are out doing actions across this country, it is our job to protect the most vulnerable around us. So please always look to your right and to your left and look out for those who are vulnerable. It is important, and us as veterans, we have those skills to have our head on a swivel at all times. And so in times like this, we do encourage it. And the last thing we are going to do is close out with a call to action. So tonight we talked about sexual assault in the military loudly, and we will continue to do so. There are a few calls to action here. If you have a veteran in your life, please talk to them about this subject. They might not share a story, but they need to know that you are now aware of the epidemic. We need civilians' help. The military population and the veteran population in this country is 6.2%. If everybody fought together on our side, it's not enough. We need civilians to look up the statistics, listen to stories, and then get involved. How do you get involved? There are multiple great organizations that are doing work on this, including Lindsay's Combat Sexual Assault. Diana Danis, if you are on Facebook, please look into her group, Service Women Who Serve. They are always putting out extremely good information, not only on this subject, but on a myriad of subjects that affect the military and veteran community. Dee is doing amazing work, not only in this community as a social worker, but she's working on repatriating our patriots, getting our service members home that have been deported. And then, of course, if you're in like the activist movement, and I know a lot of you watching probably saw me and Lindsay Knapp post a shit ton of videos about why we were in DC and speaking out as veterans against this war and speaking out against this administration. If you are a veteran and you are as pissed off as we are, not only about this subject, but about what the fuck is happening of the dumpster fire of this country, and you're ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with us, please look into a myriad of organizations, not only ours. I don't care if you join our organization. I just want you to join a organization. And there's a bunch of them. Lindsay works for Common Defense. Look into that organization. Look into About Face. Look into Veterans for Peace. Look into 5051 Vets. Look into Sons of Liberty. Look into a myriad of veteran organizations that are coming together across the country to speak out together as a unit. Because in DC, as you've seen in our posts, as different organizational members of different organizations, it was 7 organizations that came together. Veterans are organizing, and this country needs to see more of us speaking out together loudly and in unison. So my call to action tonight is veterans watching this, get involved. Family members of veterans, get involved. Military Family Speaks Out, that is an organization that you can look into. We also accept family members. We need to move in unison, like Brian said, and Diana has said, and everybody has said on this call. It's going to take us all to not only fix things that are endemic to our own community, such as MST, right? Or deported veterans, or other really good policy that we can come together and actually fix shit for once. We need to look outside of our community and organize together on a larger scale to affect change and protect this country. Because my oath meant something, and my friends dying for this country meant something. And I'm sure everybody on this panel feels the same. And so get involved. Get involved in this issue. Get involved in the VA is Not for Sale campaign done by Common Defense. Listen to Lindsay Knapp's Right to Refuse trainings. There is a myriad of veterans doing good work. I'm sure if Lucy's still on, they're doing something. They're always doing something. Veterans are doing good work. Look into the orgs, get involved, ask questions, and as civilians, please get involved in veteran issues. We need your help, especially when it comes to sexual assault, especially when it comes to this issue. Male veterans, it's your time. It is your time to stand up for your sisters in arms and talk about this issue. We hope to see you next time. Have a good night.